The courtroom smelled like old paper and polished wood, like secrets and decisions etched into the grain of time. I walked in alone, the soles of my shoes whispering against the floor as I made my way past benches filled with strangers' eyes. My thrift store suit itched at the collar. 2 nights of no sleep sat heavy under my eyes, but I kept my chin up. It wasn't pride, just the need to stay upright. Eliza sat with perfect posture at the other table, her lips painted the same crimson she wore the day she served me divorce papers. Beside her was Janelle Croft, the attorney who had a reputation for bloodless precision and a tongue sharp enough to draw blood in silence. They didn't glance at me. Why would they? I took my seat and tried to steady my hands, which refused to stop trembling. The bailiff called for order. The judge entered. Papers rustled like dry leaves. And just like that, my life, the part I'd fought so hard to preserve, was put on trial. Janelle didn't waste time. She rose like she owned the space, her voice calm but edged with disdain. Your Honor, we're here to discuss the custody arrangement of Riley and Nora Carrington, whose current living conditions under Mr. Silas Carrington are concerning. She turned toward me, not even bothering to soften the blow. This man, Your Honor, has no stable income. He works odd jobs, unreliable, inconsistent, handyman work, mostly. He lives in shared housing, sometimes even in converted garages. There is no consistent address, no reliable income, and no evidence that he can provide for these children. My hands clenched in my lap. I wanted to speak. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I watched as her words turned facts into failure. Each sentence she crafted painted me as a man my children should be protected from. And I could see the judge was listening. Eliza Carrington, Janelle continued, gesturing to my ex-wife, has maintained steady employment, provides a stable home, and has prioritized the children's education and well-being. Mr. Carrington, however, and here came the knife, can't even afford proper food or clothing for his children. Why should he get them? The judge didn't respond immediately. He just nodded, his expression unreadable. That silence was the loudest sound in the room. I felt my throat tighten. My chest burned. Not with anger, at least not yet, but with shame. I wanted to explain how I walked across town just to see them. How I skipped meals so Riley and Nora could eat. How I stayed up fixing leaky pipes in strangers' basements just to make a few bucks that sometimes didn't even last through the week. But my voice wouldn't come. Not yet. Behind me, I heard Riley shift in his seat. I had told him not to come. He insisted. I want to be there for you, he'd said. Now he was standing up. The judge noticed, brows rising slightly. Excuse me, sir, Riley said, his voice too small for this big room. May I say something? The judge looked down at him. And you are? Riley Carrington. I'm 10. Silas is my dad. There was no hesitation in his voice now. He clutched something in his hand, crumpled paper, from what I could tell. The judge leaned forward. Go on. Riley looked straight at Eliza. Her smile faltered. Just a flicker, but I caught it. I found this in Mom's safe, Riley said, lifting the paper. It's a letter. I think the judge should read it. My heart stopped. I had no idea what was on that paper. Riley walked it forward, his sneakers squeaking just a little as he crossed the courtroom floor. The bailiff took it and handed it to the judge. Eliza stood then, suddenly, her eyes wide. Your Honor, that letter is... Sit down, the judge said firmly. Let me read this first. I watched as he unfolded the letter. His expression shifted almost immediately. Eyebrows raised, mouth pressed into a line, eyes narrowing, then a moment of stillness. The courtroom, every inch of it, held its breath. The judge looked up slowly. This appears to be a confidential communication from Ms. Carrington's financial advisor, outlining a strategic plan to manipulate custody proceedings by falsifying financial hardship on Mr. Carrington's part. He looked over his glasses, including the deliberate use of hidden income, offshore accounts, and fabricated financial need. Gasps broke the still air. Janelle Croft went pale. Eliza sat down, hard, her face white as snow. My own breath caught in my throat. I looked at Riley, who returned to his seat beside Nora. She smiled, her little hand slipping into his. The judge turned to the clerk. This changes the nature of these proceedings. I'm ordering an immediate pause for a formal investigation into Ms. Carrington's finances. All custody motions are hereby suspended until we have clarity on these claims. Silas. Breathe. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I felt something thaw deep inside. I turned to look at Riley. He didn't need a thank you. He just needed to see that I wasn't broken. The storm hadn't passed, but someone had just handed me an umbrella. The judge's voice faded into a low hum as he unfolded the letter, each rustling crease sounding louder than anything Janelle Croft had said moments earlier. I sat frozen, still wearing the guilt they had dressed me in like a uniform. I didn't know what Riley had handed over. I hadn't seen that envelope before, not in my toolbox, not in my battered backpack, not on the cluttered shelves where I kept all our family court documents and scribbled notes. But Eliza knew. I saw it in her face the moment Riley held it up like a sword. Her smug poise cracked right down the center. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Dread. She leaned forward slightly as if she could will the envelope to disintegrate before the judge laid eyes on it. Let the record show, the judge said, his voice more cautious now, that this document was voluntarily submitted by the child of the plaintiff and defendant. Its authenticity will be verified as part of the ongoing review. He cleared his throat. It appears to be an email, printed and sealed, from Ms. Carrington's financial advisor, dated 4 months ago. My fingers dug into the wooden table as he began to read aloud. Subject, custody strategy, recommended financial positioning, the judge began, his tone flat but firm. Eliza, as we prepare for the upcoming hearings, I advise proceeding with our plan to recharacterize Mr. Carrington's income as unstable and insufficient. I've outlined methods to minimize your reported earnings, shift liquid assets into untouchable accounts, and delay invoice filings. The goal is simple: present you as the stable provider and Silas as an unreliable figure. I've also included suggested talking points for your attorney to reinforce the image of his financial incompetence. I recommend continuing direct deposit into the proxy accounts offshore to avoid courtroom scrutiny. A wave of silence swept through the courtroom like a cold wind. Even the court reporter paused, blinking in disbelief before resuming her typing. My ears rang. My mouth went dry. I turned to Riley again, but he was already looking at me calm, solid. He gave me the faintest nod. The judge continued reading, flipping to the second page. There was more, mentions of hiding freelance commissions, fabricating overdraft patterns, and even manipulating the kids' spending logs to reflect exaggerated needs on Eliza's part. He lowered the paper slowly, as though it physically weighed more after being read aloud. Miss Carrington, he said, addressing Eliza directly now, do you wish to confirm or deny this document's legitimacy? Janelle stood up before Eliza could even blink. Your Honor, we request a recess. My client needs to review this document in full before responding. The judge shook his head. No. I will be calling for an immediate forensic investigation into both parties' finances. The content of this letter, if verified, suggests intentional fraud with the intent to manipulate custody and child support outcomes. The children's well-being is my highest priority. This courtroom is not a place for calculated deception. Eliza opened her mouth, then closed it. Her cheeks were flushed, her knuckles white around the edge of her designer blouse. She had always been poised, composed, one step ahead, especially in court. But this she hadn't planned for. Janelle sat down beside her, whispering frantically. I didn't hear the words, but the energy was frantic, desperate. The judge shifted his gaze toward me. Mr. Carrington, I am issuing a temporary freeze on custody proceedings until a formal review can be conducted. In the meantime, supervised visitation will continue as previously scheduled. Pending the investigation, this court may reassign temporary custody should the contents of this document prove authentic. I tried to form words. Any words. But my throat locked up. All I could do was nod. Just once. Court was adjourned. The moment the gavel hit the block, it felt like the room exhaled. But I didn't. I stood slowly, shaking knees beneath me, and turned toward Riley. He stood beside Nora now, clutching her hand. When I reached him, I crouched to their level. Where did you find that? I asked him, my voice hoarse. In the safe, he said. Mom left it open one night. I was looking for my iPad charger and saw my name on the folder. I thought it was about school stuff, but when I read the letter, I knew it wasn't right. I blinked fast, trying not to cry in front of them. You were brave, Riley. That was the truth, and you told it. He shrugged, like he hadn't just flipped the entire case on its head. It didn't feel brave. It just felt like something I had to do. Eliza passed us on her way out, not even glancing our way. She was on her phone, likely already damage controlling. Janelle followed behind her, still talking in low, urgent tones. I looked back toward the courtroom doors as they closed behind them. I had come in today thinking it might be the beginning of the end, another session where my poverty was used as a weapon, another humiliation to swallow quietly. But somehow, my 10-year-old son had carried in a truth I never knew existed and laid it bare for the world to see. Outside, the air felt different, clearer. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't the one holding a secret. I wasn't hiding behind empty pockets or apologies or weak explanations. The truth had a voice now, and it came from the smallest person in the room. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't show up in your bones. It settles in your chest, quiet and constant, like a fog that never lifts. That was the kind of tired I'd lived with for the past year. People thought being broke was about money, but they never talked about how it scraped at your dignity like rust on steel. I hadn't always been this version of Silas, the one doing odd jobs, taking cold showers in someone else's garage, hoping the peanut butter would stretch until Friday. I used to have a job. A good one, too. Maintenance lead at the Stonemont Towers downtown. Full-time, steady, benefits that actually meant something. Then came the downsizing, the restructuring, the "we appreciate your service" handshake, and the email telling me HR had closed my file. That was 11 months ago. I still remembered the sound of the box I packed my things into. It creaked when I shut the lid, like even it knew this was going to be a long road down. Terry, my old high school friend, had offered me his garage. Not out of pity, just quiet loyalty. "It's not much, but it's yours," he said, tossing me a sleeping bag and a space heater. I didn't argue. The garage had been half converted, mostly storage, with a utility sink in the corner and an old futon that sagged in the middle. But it had 4 walls, a roof, and enough room for me to unroll my shame and keep it private. Weekends were for Riley and Nora. I refused to miss them. I walked across the city if I had to 2.5 miles each way, just to spend a few hours in the park with them. We didn't do big outings. We didn't eat at restaurants or watch movies in plush seats. We fed ducks, picked up leaves, made shapes in the clouds. I packed peanut butter sandwiches, sometimes with crushed-up crackers if we were lucky. Nora would press them together and call it a cookie sandwich, and I'd laugh like it wasn't killing me inside. Eliza, meanwhile, lived in our old home. The place we'd painted together. The backyard Riley had learned to ride his bike in. Only now there were new paint colors, new furniture, and a new boyfriend named Carter who wore silk robes and called my kids Buddy and Princess like he had any right. I never badmouthed her to the kids. I didn't need to. Kids notice things adults think they're hiding. Riley once said, "Carter smells like the hotel lobby," and I knew exactly what he meant: money and cologne and that plastic version of affection. The worst part wasn't the poverty. It was the story she told with it. That I had abandoned them. That I didn't care. That I was some ghost who floated in on scheduled weekends with a fake smile and empty hands. I had left, yes, but only to stop the screaming matches, the slammed doors, the insults that turned into weapons. I left so Riley wouldn't grow up thinking love meant breaking something just to see if it could be fixed again. But she twisted it. She turned my exit into a narrative, one she could parade in court with fake tears and tailored suits. She told the world I was a deadbeat, that I didn't want them, that I was unreliable, that I couldn't even provide food. She wasn't wrong, not entirely. There were nights when the kids stayed over and I didn't have enough for dinner. I made rice and mixed it with whatever canned goods I had. I pretended it was silly stew, a game we made up. I gave them the better portions, told them I'd already eaten. They always believed me. But I never missed a visit. I never forgot a birthday. When Nora was sick, I stayed up with her all night, holding her hand while she coughed into my hoodie because we didn't have tissues. When Riley scraped his knee, I cleaned it with warm water and a dish towel, then kissed the bandage like it was made of gold. I loved them with everything I had left. And still, it wasn't enough in the eyes of the court. Because love, apparently, didn't matter if you couldn't write a check with it. I took handyman gigs. Fixed gutters, unclogged toilets, retiled kitchens. Anything to keep gas in the borrowed van I sometimes used. My phone barely stayed on. My hands were always cracked and dry from the chemicals I used. But I did it. Quietly. Consistently. I kept showing up. The fall wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 tiny humiliations that stacked on top of each other. Worn soles. Missed calls. Empty shelves. Until you don't even notice you're no longer standing, you're crawling. But I hadn't stopped. And now, after Riley's letter and the judge's order for investigation, I felt something foreign stir inside me. Not anger, not relief, just the possibility of being seen. Really seen. Like someone might finally understand I wasn't the story they were being told. I sat that night in Terry's garage, the kids already asleep on their mattresses beside me, one lamp buzzing above. Riley's jacket hung by the heater, Nora's socks drying near the sink. I looked at them, breathing softly, peacefully. They had no idea how close I'd come to losing them. And if this was my bottom, I'd take it. Because I knew, deep in my bones, I was still climbing. I was sitting at a scratched-up table in the community library's smallest conference room when he walked in, Mr. Rowan, the court-appointed forensic auditor. He looked exactly like I imagined someone with that title would. Pressed gray suit, glasses with rectangular frames, hair slicked back with such discipline it probably had a schedule. He introduced himself briefly, offered a handshake that was firm but not overbearing, and then sat down with a legal pad already filled halfway. There was no small talk. No nod to the chaos of my life. Just the click of his pen and the soft rustle of pages as he turned to a fresh one. Mr. Carrington, he said, voice smooth and clinical. We've been assigned to verify both parties' financial narratives, particularly given the evidence submitted in court last week. I'll be asking questions, reviewing documents, and requesting any supporting data you might have. Do you understand? I nodded. I'll give you everything I've got. He adjusted his glasses. Let's start with your income. Do you have records of the work you've done over the last 12 months? I pulled out a plastic grocery bag, the kind that used to carry canned soup and discount bread. Inside was a mess of handwritten invoices, receipts, crumpled notes with contact numbers, and a small notebook where I logged every job. Some pages were smudged with oil or dried paint. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. Rowan didn't flinch. He just started sorting, occasionally scribbling notes or underlining details. You've been working consistently, mostly cash. Any deposits made into a formal bank account? Some, I said. When they paid me through apps or checks, I used an old community credit union account. I don't touch it much. It's usually empty. Understood. He flipped to a page in his binder. And living arrangements? Garage apartment. My friend Terry converted it for me. No lease, but I pay utilities and chip in when I can. Children visit regularly? I nodded. Every weekend. Even when I didn't have enough food, I'd make it work. He paused, looking up at me for the first time. I don't make value judgments, Mr. Carrington. But I note consistency, and I note effort. That matters more than you think. That was the first breath I took in what felt like a week. He went on, asking about everything: text threads with Eliza, wire transfers, digital communication with her lawyer, and even receipts for things like groceries and school supplies. He wasn't warm, but he wasn't cold either. Just meticulous. Like every tiny truth mattered. I gave him everything. Screenshots. PDFs. Bank app screenshots with red numbers. Texts where I begged Eliza not to cancel a weekend with the kids. Notes I'd written on my phone, budgeting meals or scheduling Riley's dentist appointments. He stayed for nearly 2 hours. Before he left, he looked me dead in the eye and said, I'll also be reviewing Ms. Carrington's submissions. If what the court read from that letter aligns with what I find, things may change rapidly. Be prepared. I didn't ask what that meant. I just nodded. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. He gave a polite nod, packed his binder, and left. 3 days passed. 3 long, slow days where I tried not to obsess, tried not to spiral into what-ifs. The kids stayed with me that Saturday, and I made French toast with day-old bread and cinnamon I'd found in the back of Terry's cabinet. Nora danced in her pajamas. Riley helped me fix the dripping faucet in the garage. We laughed. It felt normal. Almost too normal, like we were tempting fate. Then the call came. It was my court liaison. Mr. Carrington, Judge Keene has issued a temporary custody revision pending the final investigation results. Effective immediately, the children are to reside with you for the next 60 days under supervised monitoring. I dropped the phone. Not in some dramatic, movie-style gasp, just pure shock. It slid from my hand and hit the floor, and I stared at it like it had turned into a live grenade. Riley picked it up. Dad, they're staying, I whispered. You're staying with me. His eyes widened. For real? For real, I said, crouching down, my voice catching. We have 60 days. We just have to make it count. He looked at Nora. We're gonna stay with Dad. She squealed, throwing her arms around both of us. No more Carter? She asked, eyes wide with hope. No more Carter, I said. I didn't know if it was permanent. I didn't know what Eliza would do next. But I knew this much. I had a shot. Not just a scrap or a glimmer, but a real chance to prove that love wasn't measured in dollars. It was shown in presence, in effort, in not giving up even when everything else falls away. That evening, I cleaned the garage like I was preparing for royalty. I swept. I washed sheets. I arranged their books and toys in little bins I'd picked up from the thrift store. I fixed the broken outlet with borrowed tools. I turned the heater on early so the space would be warm by bedtime. They helped. Nora folded washcloths. Riley made signs that said, "Our room," and "No adults except Dad." It wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. For the first time in months, I lay in bed and listened to their breathing in the room beside me. I didn't have much. But I had this. I had them. And the fog that had lived in my chest? It was finally beginning to lift. When you're used to losing, small victories feel suspicious, like something you're not sure you deserve, or something that'll get taken back the moment you let your guard down. That's how it felt waking up the morning after the custody revision. Riley was already up, fixing cereal for himself and Nora, carefully rationing the milk because he knew how things worked. I watched him from my bed, if you could call a sagging couch cushion with two comforters a bed, and something cracked open inside me. Not just pride, gratitude. Because even though I'd failed them in so many material ways, they still believed I was enough. Later that week, I got a call from Amara Fields. At first, I didn't recognize the name. Then she explained. Court-assigned social worker, brought in after the document Riley submitted triggered a deeper review. I braced myself for another round of judgment. I expected a clipboard and a raised eyebrow and the kind of polite dismissal I'd gotten used to. But Amara was different. She showed up at Terry's garage on a Thursday morning in jeans and a soft brown sweater, not a suit. She smiled when she saw Riley and Nora bundled up together, drawing on the cement floor with chalk. "Hi there," she said, kneeling down to their level. "I'm here to make sure your dad's as awesome as you say he is." Riley beamed. "He is." Nora nodded solemnly. "He makes the best French toast with only old bread." Amara laughed. "That's a talent, huh?" She spent the next hour talking to me, not just about money, but about routines. How often I cooked. How I handled school pickups. What bedtime looked like. She asked about the kids' likes, fears, quirks. I told her about Riley's obsession with maps and how Nora sometimes fell asleep mid-sentence during story time. I showed her the whiteboard I'd rigged up on the garage wall with our weekly schedule. It wasn't much, but it was real, honest. "I know this setup isn't ideal," I admitted as I poured coffee into chipped mugs. "But I'm doing what I can. Every dollar goes to them first." Amara nodded slowly. "I can see that. And I've interviewed their teachers. Did you know Riley volunteers to help with class supplies? He told his teacher it's so Dad doesn't have to buy extras." That stung. Deep. I rubbed my hand over my face. "I didn't know that." "He's proud of you," she said softly. "So is Nora. They feel safe here. That matters more than income brackets." She left me with a stack of resources, food pantry schedules, housing waitlist forms, job referrals. But it wasn't pity. It felt like someone saying, "You're not invisible anymore." The next one came unexpectedly. I got a call about a part-time position at a local warehouse. It wasn't glamorous, loading trucks and sorting packages, but it was steady. Nights and early mornings, perfect hours for when the kids were in school or asleep. I took it, no questions asked. The first paycheck felt like gold. I went straight to the second-hand store. Winter was coming fast, and I needed to get ahead of it. I found two decent coats, one navy, one bright red. Riley's was a bit snug in the shoulders, but he didn't care. Nora twirled in hers like it was made of silk. I bought gloves, two mismatched sizes, but they worked. That night, we had a real dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti with jar sauce and garlic toast. But the kids devoured it like it came from a five-star chef. Riley even cleared the dishes without being asked. Nora made a little paper crown and declared me king dad of the kitchen. They laughed like we had nothing to worry about. And for a moment, I believed it. But progress doesn't mean peace. Not completely. Eliza showed up unannounced the following Sunday during supervised visitation hours. She wasn't smiling. She had on her high heels and her courtroom face, the one that could lie without flinching. "Silas," she said coolly, "I want to speak to the children." "Alone?" "No," I said. My voice didn't shake. "All visits go through the liaison now." She scoffed. "So this is what we're doing now? Pretending you're the responsible one." "We're not pretending anything," I said. They're stable. They're safe. That's what matters. Riley heard her tone and stepped between us, chin raised. You lied in court, Mom. The words hit her like a slap. For once, she didn't have a reply. She just turned and walked back to her car, heels cracking against the driveway like gunshots. Amara called me that evening. I heard she came by. Yeah, I said, but we're okay. You're more than okay, she told me. I'm recommending you for transitional housing. Clean, two-bedroom unit, discounted rent while you work. You've earned it. I sat down slowly. Really? Really? I don't push for these often, but you're proving something a lot of people give up trying to. I didn't know what to say. I looked over at Riley and Nora, curled up on the futon, watching cartoons with soft smiles on their faces. That night, after they fell asleep, I stepped outside and stood in the cold. For the first time, the stars didn't feel out of reach. The sky didn't feel like it was falling on me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and realized I hadn't felt afraid all week. That had to mean something, even if it was small. Courtrooms are strange places. Sterile and stiff, yet capable of hosting the messiest parts of human lives. I walked in wearing the same thrifted navy blazer I'd worn at the last hearing, but something felt different this time. Maybe it was the weight of progress behind me. Steady work at the warehouse, a real roof coming soon, kids who laughed more and flinched less. Or maybe it was that Eliza didn't meet my eyes when I entered. She was there with Janelle again, but the confidence they used to wear like perfume had faded. Judge Keene took the bench, expression unreadable. His robes were crisp, his posture perfect. But even from a distance, I could sense a shift, like the air had rearranged itself. This court, he began, has reviewed the preliminary findings submitted by Mr. Rowan, our independent financial auditor. Today's hearing is to present those findings officially and determine whether the prior custody arrangements should be amended based on new evidence. Janelle stood, no longer the sleek shark of before. She seemed careful, as if every word might step on a landmine. Your Honor, she began, we have not had adequate time to fully analyze Mr. Rowan's report, and we'd like to request a continuance. Request denied, Judge Keene said before she could even warm up to the argument. You were granted 2 full weeks to review the materials. Let's proceed. Rowan approached the bench with his binder, same polished presence as always. He greeted the judge, then turned to the courtroom. I've conducted an exhaustive review of both parties' financial histories over the past 18 months, including cross-referencing offshore activity, business filings, freelance income, and unreported assets. He opened the binder and began to read, but his words weren't numbers, they were revelations. Ms. Carrington has maintained multiple offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg, through which over $180,000 was routed in staggered payments across 7 months. Payments not declared on any tax filings or court disclosures. Eliza's face drained of all color. Rowan didn't pause. Further, we found that Ms. Carrington has been drawing significant income from 2 registered LLCs she operates under aliases, one of which receives consistent freelance payment for digital marketing services. None of these accounts or earnings were reported in the original custody filings. Janelle scribbled notes furiously, but it was too late. The damage was already bleeding out onto the courtroom floor. Rowan looked directly at the judge. This evidence indicates a deliberate attempt to misrepresent Ms. Carrington's financial status with the goal of influencing custody outcomes and minimizing court-mandated support obligations. Judge Keene leaned back, hands folded. Continue. Additionally, Rowan said, Mr. Carrington's financial trail, while modest, shows complete transparency. He has logged consistent income through irregular but traceable handyman work, maintained communication with creditors, and demonstrated all earnings, regardless of amount. He has paid for school supplies, clothing, and medical copays, despite his limited means. Not once did he obscure or exaggerate his financial position. I tried to sit still, but my hands trembled. Then came the part one hadn't expected. Rowan turned the page. Furthermore, interviews with educators, neighbors, and the court-assigned social worker reveal that Mr. Carrington, while living under constrained conditions, has maintained a stable, nurturing, and responsible presence in his children's lives. Ms. Carrington, by contrast, has been absent for extended periods and delegated child supervision to non-relatives without notification to the court. Eliza finally stood. That's not true. Her voice cracked. I've taken care of them. Judge Keene raised his hand. Sit down, Ms. Carrington. She hesitated, then did. Rowan concluded his report and handed it to the clerk. The courtroom sat in stillness. For the first time, no one looked at me with pity. No one saw a broken man. Just a father who hadn't stopped showing up. Judge Keene folded his hands again. This court finds substantial evidence of financial deception and willful manipulation on the part of Ms. Carrington, designed specifically to skew custody decisions in her favor. As such, I am issuing an immediate revision to the existing custody order. My heart thudded. I held my breath. Mr. Carrington, the judge said, his voice steady, temporary custody of Riley and Nora Carrington is hereby granted to you, effective immediately. Ms. Carrington's visitation is to be supervised until further notice. A formal review will take place in 60 days to assess long-term custody arrangements. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. It took me a moment to realize those words were meant for me, that they were real. Eliza stood again. This isn't fair. That letter should never have been. The judge cut her off. Miss Carrington, I suggest you speak with your attorney before saying anything further. She sat, face flushed, jaw tight. Janelle didn't speak again. There was nothing left to defend. As the gavel came down, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vengeance or superiority. I just felt whole again, like the version of myself that had been buried beneath months of accusation and assumption had finally stepped back into the light. Outside the courtroom, I found Riley and Nora sitting quietly on a bench. Nora was doodling on a napkin. Riley looked up the moment he saw me. Well? He asked. I nodded, crouching in front of them. You're coming home with me. For real this time. Nora jumped into my arms. Riley's smile broke wide, and he didn't try to hide the tears. I let mine fall too. We walked out together, hand in hand, no longer shadows. And for the first time in a long time, the air didn't just shift. It felt clean. The first morning after the hearing, I woke up before the kids. The garage-turned bedroom smelled faintly of laundry detergent and maple syrup from the night before. The heater hummed in the corner, doing its best to cut the early chill. I lay there quietly, staring at the ceiling. The sound of Riley's soft breathing mixed with Nora's little snore, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the weight of the next court date pressing down on me like a stone. No fear. No calculation. Just stillness. I got up, careful not to wake them, and started prepping breakfast. Pancakes. Not the thin kind that came from a just-add-water mix, but the thick, fluffy kind that reminded me of Sunday mornings with my own mom back when things were simpler. We didn't have much then either, but she always made sure breakfast tasted like love. I guess I wanted to pass that on. I found some flour, baking powder, and the last 2 eggs we had in the fridge. Riley had helped me buy them with coins he saved in a jar marked Adventure Fund. He didn't mind. This is a food adventure, he'd said with a grin. As I whisked the batter, I heard small footsteps behind me. Nora, in her footy pajamas, hair a mess of soft curls, holding her stuffed bunny by one ear. Morning, Daddy, she said, voice sleepy. Morning, sweetheart, I whispered, scooping her up with one arm and setting her on the counter. You hungry? She nodded, then yawned. Can we make faces with fruit again? We're out of fruit, I admitted. But we've got syrup. That counts as fun, right? She giggled and clapped her hands. Riley followed shortly after, stretching and rubbing his eyes. He saw the pancakes and smiled wide. You're doing the triple stack? Only the best for my favorite sous chefs. We cooked together. Nora mixed. Riley flipped. I poured the batter into uneven circles and pretended they were perfect. We didn't have a proper dining table, so we used the old crate Terry had let me borrow, draped with a clean towel to make it feel like more than it was. We ate with our fingers, syrup sticking to everything, and for once, I didn't care about the mess. They laughed. Loud, unguarded laughter that filled the space and bounced off the concrete walls like music. I laughed too. Not politely. Not halfway. Real, chest-deep laughter. The kind I'd forgotten I still had in me. After breakfast, they ran outside to play in the little patch of gravel behind the garage. I sat at the crate table, drinking instant coffee from a chipped mug, watching them through the open door. The sun was out. Not warm, but enough to light the morning. That's when I pulled out my notebook. I'd started journaling months ago. Not because I thought I was a writer, but because I needed to get the noise out of my head. At first, it was just bullet points. What bills were due, job leads, parenting schedules. Then it turned into sentences. Fragments of thoughts I didn't want to lose. Eventually, it became a sort of therapy. A quiet witness to my survival. But that morning, I didn't write about bills or pain. I wrote about pancakes, about Nora's syrup smile, about Riley's careful measuring of baking powder, about how their laughter filled the gaps I'd forgotten were inside me, about how, somehow, we were making this broken place into a home, not with things, but with presence. Then I wrote about the courtroom, about how Riley's voice cut through the lie Eliza had woven, about how that one folded piece of paper changed everything. I wrote his name a dozen times, underlined it, and beside it I wrote, "Bravery isn't loud. Sometimes, it's just standing up when the room tells you to sit down." The pages filled quickly, each word a thread stitching something back together inside me. Later that night, after spaghetti leftovers and 2 rounds of Go Fish, I tucked them into their futon beds, both bundled in mismatched blankets. Riley turned toward me before I could leave the room. "Dad," he said quietly. "Yeah, buddy?" Was I wrong to take that letter? I stopped in the doorway. He looked smaller somehow, like the question had been sitting on him, pressing him flat. I crossed the room, knelt beside his bed, and brushed the hair from his forehead. "No," I said. "You told the truth when nobody else would. That's never wrong. But Mom was so mad." "I know," I said softly. "And I'm sorry. I know it wasn't easy. But you were brave. What you did, it changed everything." He nodded slowly, eyes heavy. "Will she hate me now?" My throat tightened. "No," I whispered. "She may be angry, but someday she'll understand. And even if she doesn't, you did the right thing. And I'll always be proud of you for that." He closed his eyes, and I stayed there until his breathing evened out. I walked outside into the night air, wrapping myself in an old coat. The stars were visible again. Not many, but enough. Enough to remind me that even in a city sky, there's always a glimmer if you wait long enough. Back inside, I sat down with my notebook again. I flipped to a blank page. Today was simple, I wrote. Pancakes, peace, and the quiet proof that we're still here. Still standing. Still building. It wasn't victory in the way courts measure it. It wasn't wealth or power or a name cleared in headlines. But it was joy. And that, I'd come to learn, is its own kind of justice. I never planned on going back to school, especially not after everything. But after that morning in court, after the judge spoke my name like I actually mattered, I realized something had shifted inside me. I had climbed out of the hole I was thrown into, but staying out meant building something stronger than what I had before. I couldn't keep surviving on handyman gigs forever. So, one night, after Nora was asleep and Riley was halfway through his drawing of the solar system, I opened the old laptop Terry had loaned me and searched online HVAC certification programs near me. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what I dreamed of doing as a kid, but it was practical. It was reliable. And most of all, it was mine. Something I could do with my hands and my mind. Something I could build that wouldn't depend on anyone else's approval or presence. I filled out the form for a part-time certification course. 3 months, online modules, night classes, and a payment plan I could stretch thin. I clicked submit with shaky fingers. It felt like writing a letter to a future I hadn't dared to hope for. That weekend, I was invited to speak at a local Fathers group. Amara had passed my name along after I finished paperwork for our transitional housing move. "They're always looking for stories," she said. "And yours matters more than you realize." I hesitated. Public speaking wasn't exactly my thing. But then I thought about Riley, how he had stood up in a courtroom without being asked to, just to tell the truth. If he could do that, I could stand in a room full of fathers and try to find the words. The meeting was in a rec center gymnasium, small folding chairs, lukewarm coffee in a dispenser. Most of the men there wore tired faces and second-hand jackets like mine. They weren't looking for inspiration. They were looking for someone who didn't talk down to them. I stood at the front with my hands stuffed in my pockets and told them everything. The job loss. The garage. The court hearings. The letter. Riley's voice. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told them about crying behind the steering wheel and pretending peanut butter and rice was a gourmet meal. I talked about the shame of asking your kid to wear shoes that don't fit because you're between paychecks again. And I told them how, somehow, it wasn't the job or the money or the judge that saved me. It was my kid. A child who saw injustice and did something about it. When I finished, a man in the back with silver in his beard raised his hand. "You working now?" I nodded. "Warehouse nights. Part-time. And I just signed up for an HVAC program." He grinned. "Good man. I run weekend maintenance on 3 buildings near the university. You got hands, and you're willing to learn. I can use you Saturdays." I shook his hand that night like it was made of gold. Because in a way, it was. Back home, the garage felt warmer even though the temperature hadn't changed. We were just a week away from moving into the new place, a two-bedroom unit in a transitional housing complex on the East End. Clean, safe, subsidized. I had walked through it twice already, mentally placing beds and drawing invisible lines for where Nora's art would go and where Riley's desk might fit. I wasn't daydreaming anymore. I was planning. Eliza tried to file a motion to revisit custody. Of course she did. Janelle Croft showed up again with a new blazer and a slightly more nervous smile. But the evidence hadn't changed. If anything, it had grown more damning. The motion was denied. Riley and Nora stayed with me. Supervised visits for Eliza remained limited, and she stopped showing up to most of them. I didn't say anything bad about her, not to the kids, not even to myself. Some truths didn't need repeating. They just revealed themselves over time. I focused on us. Each evening after dinner, Riley and I would sit down at the little fold-out table in the garage. He'd work on his drawings, and I'd watch HVAC videos on the laptop. He'd glance at the screen sometimes. "That looks complicated," he said once. "It is," I admitted. "But it's worth it." He tilted his head. "Are you doing it for us?" "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "But also for me." He nodded, satisfied. Nora made us a countdown chart with construction paper and glitter. 10 days until the new house, it read. Every morning, she tore off a piece and handed it to me like it was sacred. "Almost there, Daddy," she'd whisper, as if afraid to say it too loud. And we were. Almost there. Each day felt a little lighter. Each hour a little more certain. I stopped checking my phone for disaster. I stopped bracing myself for the next insult or ambush. I started hearing my own voice again. Not the one that begged or apologized, but the one that asked questions, made jokes, told bedtime stories with silly accents. The one I thought I'd lost. And it wasn't just my voice. It was my authority. My sense of worth. The feeling of coming home to something I had built, not bought, not borrowed, not inherited, but built from the wreckage of what Eliza tried to destroy. That was more than progress. That was power. And it was just the beginning. Riley stood on the small stage at his elementary school, holding a sheet of lined paper in both hands. He looked smaller than usual in his too big dress shirt and clip-on tie, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "My name is Riley Carrington. I'm in 5th grade. And this is my story." The room was full of folding chairs and murmuring parents, the air thick with pride and nerves. I sat in the second row, knees bouncing, not sure what he'd written. I only knew he'd insisted I come. "You have to be there, Dad," he'd said. "I'm reading something important." I wore my cleanest shirt, pressed it the best I could with a borrowed iron. Nora sat next to me, braids neat, wearing the little dress we found at the thrift shop. The one she called her sparkle uniform. She held my hand and swung her legs beneath the seat, oblivious to the weight pressing against my ribs. Riley cleared his throat. "My essay is called My Dad is My Hero," he said. The room quieted. I didn't breathe. When people think about heroes, they think about capes or flying or superpowers. But my dad doesn't wear a cape. He wears work boots with holes in them, and sometimes he forgets to eat because he's saving dinner for us. But he always shows up. He showed up when it was raining and he had no umbrella. He showed up when I was sick and scared. He even showed up when it felt like the world was against him. A lump rose in my throat. People think money makes you a better parent, that you need a big house and a fancy car. But I've had both, and I've had neither. And I can tell you this, love is not something you buy. Love is showing up. And my dad never missed a weekend. Even when he had no car. Even when he was tired. Even when my mom said he didn't care. His hands trembled a little now, but his voice stayed strong. He didn't give me toys or trips. He gave me truth. He taught me how to fix things. He taught me how to be brave. He taught me that doing the right thing is more important than being right. He looked up at the crowd. I'm proud of him. Not because he's perfect, but because he didn't quit. He stepped back from the mic, folded his paper, and walked off stage without looking at me. I sat there stunned, blinking fast, trying to keep it together. Nora nudged me. "You gonna cry, Daddy?" I chuckled, throat tight. Maybe just a little. After the event, parents mingled in the hallway, congratulating each other on their kids' performances. Some smiled at me kindly, a few even shook my hand. One of the teachers pulled me aside. "Riley's piece, it moved everyone," she said. "You've got a good one there." "I know," I said, heart still thudding. "I really do." When we got home to the transitional apartment, a modest but clean 2-bedroom, I made grilled cheese and tomato soup for dinner. We didn't have a table yet, just a fold-out card table we ate on, but that night it felt like a feast. Riley dipped his sandwich and acted like it was a Michelin-starred dish. Nora kept asking if she could wear her sparkle dress to bed. Afterward, we curled up on the couch and watched a movie on the tiny TV Terry had loaned us. Halfway through, Riley leaned against me and whispered, I was scared to read it out loud. I couldn't tell, I said. I was. But I remembered what you told me. What's that? That truth walks on its own legs. I smiled and pulled him closer. You're gonna be all right, kid. Later, after I tucked them both in, I sat on the small balcony off the bedroom. The night air was cool, and the hum of distant traffic sounded more like a lullaby than a warning. I opened my notebook again and flipped to a new page. Love is quiet, steady, unshakable. It's not what people see. It's what they feel, in their bones, in the moments between the noise. In showing up, I paused, then wrote. Today, my son told a room full of strangers that I was his hero. And for once, I didn't flinch. I believed him. I didn't know how long the peace would last. There was still a final custody hearing scheduled in a few weeks. Eliza had been mostly silent, but silence didn't mean surrender. And yet, it didn't matter. Not in the way it used to. Because whatever the court said, whatever future fights awaited, I had something she could never fabricate or manipulate. Riley and Nora knew the truth. They knew I hadn't left them. They knew I fought. They knew what love looked like. It wasn't shiny. It wasn't wrapped in ribbon. It wasn't always clean or easy. It was a dad kneeling in the rain to tie his daughter's shoes. It was French toast on a borrowed plate. It was walking across the city just to keep a promise. It was a 10-year-old boy who found a letter and made a choice. And it was this, a quiet apartment, 2 sleeping children, and a man finally starting to believe he was enough. I closed the notebook, let the stars settle around me, and whispered into the night. I'm still here. 6 months later, I stood outside Courtroom 3B again, but this time, I wasn't holding my breath. I wasn't rehearsing responses in my head or gripping the edge of a thrift store tie like a lifeline. I was holding Nora's hand, her fingers sticky from a granola bar she'd insisted on finishing in the car. Riley stood beside me, taller than I remembered him being even a few months ago, wearing the button-up he picked himself. His collar was crooked. I didn't fix it. You ready? I asked them both. Nora nodded like she was going to a birthday party. Riley gave me a small smile and said, You got this. I think I did. We walked into the courtroom together. I didn't sit behind a lawyer because I still didn't have one. But I also didn't sit like a man on trial. I sat like a father who had shown up every single day. And today, I was here to put a period at the end of a sentence that had gone on too long. Judge Keene entered, adjusted his glasses, and glanced at the paperwork in front of him. This hearing is to finalize the custody of Riley and Nora Carrington, he said, his voice calm and clear. All evidence has been reviewed, all visitation logs submitted, and all previous filings accounted for. Eliza was present. She sat with a different attorney now, one younger, less rehearsed. She didn't look at me, and I didn't need her to. The silence between us had grown cold and familiar, but I no longer felt the sting of it. Her supervised visits had dwindled down to twice a month, and sometimes she didn't show. When she did, it was awkward and brief. I didn't interfere. I didn't gloat. I let time do the talking. Judge Keene cleared his throat and continued. Based on the children's testimonies, the findings of the court-appointed auditor, the assessments from Child and Family Services, and the clear stability demonstrated by Mr. Carrington, this court awards full legal and physical custody to the father. I felt it before I heard it. Riley's small exhale. Nora squeezed my hand. My heart, which had been quietly holding back every fear for months, finally let go. Judge Keene wasn't finished. Ms. Carrington will retain limited supervised visitation to be reassessed in 1 year, contingent on counseling participation and compliance with the court's financial disclosures. Eliza nodded once, almost robotically. No protests this time, just resignation. Then the judge did something I hadn't expected. He looked directly at me. Mr. Carrington, this court acknowledges the extraordinary effort you've made under challenging circumstances. You've done right by your children. You've shown what responsible, present parenting looks like. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, thank you. He banged the gavel. That was it. When we stepped outside, the air felt like spring, even though it was technically still winter. Something about it was softer, brighter. Riley turned to me and said, Can we get pancakes to celebrate? You know the answer to that, I grinned. We stopped by a local diner on the way home. Nothing fancy, but the kids called it our spot because we'd gone there after the last court date too. We got a booth. Nora ordered chocolate chip pancakes shaped like bears. Riley went for the blueberry stack. I got coffee, black, and the cheapest plate on the menu, but it tasted better than anything I remembered. Everything did. That evening, back at the apartment, I set down the final cardboard box in Riley's new room. We'd gotten a proper table a few weeks earlier, plus a set of second-hand bunk beds that made the kids feel like they were living in a hotel. I watched as they unpacked their things. Riley arranging his art supplies, Nora lining up her stuffed animals in a perfect row. The space wasn't big, but it was ours, and it no longer felt like we were passing through. Later that night, I walked down the hallway and peeked into each bedroom. Nora was asleep with one leg off the bed, drooling on her bunny. Riley had fallen asleep with his glasses still on, his open sketchpad resting on his chest. I eased them off, placed the sketchpad on his nightstand, and pulled the blanket over him. I stood there for a long time, just watching them. Not because I was worried they'd disappear, but because I finally could. There was no paperwork left to fill out. No hearings looming. No fear clenching in my chest. Just quiet. Just peace. I returned to the living room and sat on the couch, notebook in hand. I flipped past pages filled with pain and doubt, past the entries where I worried I wasn't enough, past the court dates and the meal logs and the job hunt rants. I reached a blank page and wrote, "Today, I got to stop fighting. Today, I got to start living. Today, my kids came home for good." I paused, then underlined it. Outside the window, the streetlight flickered. In the distance, a train passed, its hum low and steady, like a heartbeat that no longer had to race. I thought about everything we'd survived. The accusations. The silence. The way they tried to measure love with bank statements. I thought about Riley's voice breaking through a courtroom lie. About Nora holding my hand when the world felt too big. About pancakes. About patience. About every invisible act of love that had stacked up into a new beginning. I closed the notebook, and I smiled. Because now, when the doorbell rang, I didn't flinch. Now, when I checked the calendar, it was to plan a weekend hike, not a court appearance. Now, when the kids said, "Dad, can we?" I didn't have to brace myself for the word go. Now, they were here. Really here. And so was I.